Hello, everyone. I'm Claudiu Murgan, of the host of the Spiritual Inspire podcast. And before we start, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is Susan Morgan Taylor. Susan is a holistically oriented licensed professional counselor, somatic therapist, and intimacy and relationship coach specialized in sex therapy, communication, and marriage and relationships. She's also a certified clinical trauma professional and a certified mental health integrative medicine provider with a background in holistic healing, somatic embodiment practices, spiritual teaching, and intuitive healing and coaching. You can find more about Susan and her work at pathwaytopleasure.com. Susan, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Claudia. I'm so excited to see where we get to go today. So I'm going to obviously let you take the lead, but thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be a part of the show.
Yes, and to be honest with you, you are my first guest, which will bring this theme into the open and the spiritual world. And it's good, I think, to have this type of discussion. It is necessary in today's environment. And I think humanity is overdue and overpass that or this delicate subject, especially when we bring in spirituality and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're so right, especially when it comes to the topic of sex and the topic of spirituality. A lot of times the thing I hear is like, well, how I don't see the relationship. I don't understand how the two are related. How can sex be spiritual? But from my experience, my perspective, it is the absolute most spiritual thing that we have. It's an act of creation, not just creation of life through creating new humans, but truly sex is really about we can create universes and worlds through how we show up, how we have sex and make love, and how we do relationship. To me, it's extremely deep and spiritual, and I'm excited to chat about it with you.
Yes, and I will continue by reading one of your statements. I believe that sex is the most direct pathway to our deepest healing and the fulfillment of our deepest human yearnings for connection and love. Why is that?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I love to work with sexuality and is because sex tends to be the thing that it touches our most vulnerable parts. It touches the deepest part of our humanity. Um, and inside of that, it can really touch the parts of us that need the most healing, which is why sexual relationships can sometimes be so complicated. But I believe that by going straight to the sex, we actually can address so many other things that affect our lives. So it's not just about what happens in the bedroom or what's getting stuck in what hole and when and the desire is higher, lower, but really, truly, it's about the essence of who we are as humans. It's about how we show up for life, how we show up in relationship to ourselves, in relationship to another, and in relationship to life, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, as a whole from the bigger picture. So it truly informs literally how we connect or how we disconnect, how connected we feel, how disconnected we feel. All of that will show up in our sexual relationship.
Yes, and if we have to go by history books which are not taught in schools, initially we were created without the desire of reproduction, but later on, that gene, that desire was put back on just because those creating us or who created us needed some workforce, and everything started from there. So I think it, in the end, is beneficial to take advantage in a very sensual, pleasurable, spiritual way of these qualities embedded into us.
Yeah, well, I definitely hear you, and that's sort of like a very interesting topic, and I bet you've got some other guests that could really dive into that whole piece around the worker race as humans and all that. But absolutely, I mean, sexual relationship and our sexuality is, it's so much bigger again than just an act that we do in the bedroom. It truly is about the life force energy that flows through us, and that it can be so much more than just trying to get a little gratification or a little bit of pleasure. It's only being used to create babies, for example. The energy that we have inside of us is the creative life force principle. It literally is one of the most powerful forces in the entire universe. And I believe that that's really also why our sexuality and the sexual energy over the ages and through, a lot of religious dogma that has really distorted the truth. Many of this, spiritual truths has really gotten distorted through mainstream religion, and religious dogma. But one of the reasons why the sex and sexual energy has been so subjugated and shamed, and people have been made afraid of it, is because that's how you would control. When we have access to that, we are unstoppable. We can truly create universes. We can create businesses, we can create human life. So the act of sex is powerful, but the energy that we access through our sexual life force energy is one of the most powerful forces in the world. So it very much makes sense that, that force would be distorted, and that we would, we've kind of been led astray, I believe, really around that, and the power of our sexuality, and how we can really use it to become more conscious, better human beings, not just to, have a little pleasure is great. Creating a life is wonderful, but it really is something so much more powerful than that, potentially.
Yes, and several years ago, I watched a BBC documentary, the correlation between the religious anniversaries and celebrations and sexuality. And the guy came up with a number about 40 or 43 days a year when people which were religious were allowed to have sex. So imagine that everyone looking at the calendar, trying to get pleasure within that specific time frame, they won't think of having something magical, something creating universes, as you said. They're just looking at, okay, let's see if we can make a baby or something else, because then tomorrow we are not allowed to have sex anymore. So it was that idea ingrained into our mind that if we are religious, we really have to obey that rule, and we cannot live our lives based on other principles.
Yeah, and I have not seen that documentary, though I would love to. It sounds really interesting. And a lot of the what we have really in Christianity, especially, is many of the Christian holidays were originally pagan holidays, and the Christian church came in and sort of co-opted it as a way to get interest in Christianity and pull people out of the pagan religions. But those pagan religions were really about connection to the earth and the fertility of the earth and the life-giving nature of the earth, which is reflected through our human bodies. And again, I think, again, I haven't seen the documentary, but I think that's just another example of how the distortion has come in to try to monopolize that power, right? Like what you're speaking to is like, oh, you can only have sex on these certain days, right? How to keep that life force, creative, life-giving energy under control, so that the people can't use it for awakening and creating new worlds and universes and all that cool stuff we're talking about.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the pagan holidays were celebrating the feminine. And when the church took over, it was the patriarchal aspect of our lives, and the feminine was put on the back burner, and, then the Inquisition and everything else. So everything changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the earth-based religions typically tend to be like, in the ancient days, the goddess-based religions that worship the earth and the creative principles of the powers and magic of the earth. And, what I always find so funny in religion is, calling the Holy Spirit a he. We can't have he and he made a baby, right? Father, Spirit, and Son. The two masculine life force principles can't create a child. And my own spiritual journey, my own experience, and how I see the Holy Spirit is actually the feminine force. It is literally the feminine creative life force principle, which would be akin to the orgasmic sexual life force energy. The energy of orgasm is equivalent to the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. It literally is, to me, one and the same. And yet what you're speaking to is exactly that, the way the church took that and distorted it, made it all masculine, that it's all men or male, which isn't even possible. We have to have the two opposing forces to create. The two opposing polarities, kind of like in your beautiful background there, the Shiva and Shakti energies. We have to have the two opposites. And it's actually that tension of polarity that generates new life. If you have same and same, it does not have the requisite amount of tension and fire, so to speak, to literally generate new life. So I think that's always kind of an interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people tend to think about very often in terms of the whole how we've distorted these fundamental energies of creation and how that's shown up in our religious traditions.
Indeed. And there are certain cultures, especially in South America, which they preserve this idea of femininity and the mother. And again, I was watching recently a documentary from Peru where the women of the community are in charge of preserving the seeds and planting the seeds because this is their responsibility. They have to be sure that the crop will be healthy and their energy will be transferred into the seeds and then into the earth, and the men will come and water the plants, will take care of the crop later on. But the initial act is done by the women.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I love that. And yeah, I think we fail to realize that, yeah, I mean, creation and life itself, even in the traditions of India, the tantric traditions of India would call life itself is actually feminine. It's moving, it's alive, it's the opposite of that would be the masculine, which is stillness, pure consciousness, versus movement, dance, life, expressiveness. And I think you see that very much if we look at what life is, and the rivers and the oceans and the trees, it's all alive and moving. It's not still.
Yes. And because we are talking about, opposite sides and energies and masculine and feminine, some heretics are mentioning or they wrote about the fact that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a very intimate relationship, which was based on a tantric aspect of life and healing energies and uh, energies which will awaken them into their power. What's your take on this
Oh,
subject?
I just love, 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 love that you just brought this up because, yeah, the Magdalene energy is something very near and dear to my heart. And, one of the things that I think we don't realize in the Western world is we don't realize that we actually have our very own tantric tradition, Western Tantra. We actually have our very own indigenous tantric traditions in the Western culture, but so many people don't realize this. We think, we can only look to India or Tibet for the Tantra practices, but the mystical path of Christianity. So there's many, many, many different sects of Christianity. And one of them is called the Gnostic path. And again, within Gnosticism, there's actually many different schools of thought, even within the Gnostic tradition. One of the paths of Gnosticism is called Sophian Gnosticism, which is entirely founded on the belief that Magdalene was the co-equal and co-enlightened with Christ. She is the feminine manifestation of the Christ consciousness. That tradition is actually extremely beautiful. You can find books on it now, but originally it was an oral tradition. So the stories were only passed down orally until recently, within the last 20 years, maybe. The elders of that tradition start to write the stories down. And it's what I find so beautiful about it is it's the entire perspective. It's the greatest story ever told that we would get, say, in the Bible. However, it's told from the perspective of the feminine. It's told from the perspective of Mary Magdalene as sort of the central figure of the stories. And where in the story she meets her beloved. So there's a beautiful story in there around how she comes to meet her beloved, Christ Yeshua, Christ Jesus, at the Sermon on the Mount, and how they have this beautiful soul connection. Part of what's lovely about that tradition as well, the Sophian Gnostic tradition, is that this isn't about like, did it really happen? I think you get a lot of that in the religious realms. Like, but was it real? Did Jesus really live? What evidence do we have that this is true or not? And you're going to have the naysayers and have the people that can prove it. And we spend this energy trying to prove, did it actually happen? Well, the Gnostic tradition would look at it very differently, the Sophian Gnostics specifically, and how they look at it as this is story. And whether it's factually based or not is not the most important thing. What's important is that it's the spirit of truth and the transmission of light It moves through the story, specifically as the storyteller tells it, which is partly why the oral tradition was so valued, because the story would morph, and it would change and it would grow as the particular storyteller would tell particular gospel or the particular story. And that was actually, it was invited and it was welcome in that tradition. And it was understood that the stories would actually expand and grow and change in response to how the divine spirit moves through that particular person. And when we look at the feminine pathways, the feminine spiritual what we have in the world, by the way, that most people are familiar with, are actually masculine practices. We can talk more about that in a minute. The feminine practices are really exactly that. It's really about our own internal connection to God, universe, whatever you want to call it. The holy flame is a term that I use for that, for me personally. It's our own interconnection to that and allowing that force to actually move through us in a way and express through us in a way that's unique to us and actually teach us through what's called direct revelation. So that's a term that you'll find in the Gnostic tradition specifically, where we literally have access to the secret knowledge of God as it's brought through us uniquely as individuals. And this is very much a feminine practice because it's internal. It's a personal relationship with our own Godhead versus what we have in mainstream religion, which are structures, dogma, rules, external focus, looking to the future. Heaven is out there. We get to heaven when we die. The feminine traditions say, and actually Jesus taught this in his own words, that the kingdom is here now. The kingdom of heaven is not in the sea, it's not in the sky, it's inside of you and it's all around you, except that we just don't know how to see it. So the feminine pathways, which are tantric in nature, tantric meaning union, meaning non-separation, is entirely about learning how to use this physical world around us, how to use relationship, intimate relationship, friendships, any relationship, and also how to use the mundane act of sex as an actual portal into our divine awakening, as a gateway into heaven on earth here now. So Mary Magdalene, in the role of co-enlightened with Christ, is merely what you have right there behind you, although that's the form in the Indian tradition, Shiva Shakti. She merely is that feminine life force principle that cannot function without its equal and opposite, which is the masculine, which we see in Christ Yeshua. Christ Yeshua, Christ Jesus, had what the Sophians would refer to as the external ministry. Right? His ministry was external. It's the masculine. It's bringing structure. It's bringing information. It's spreading outward into the world. We've had that for the last 2,000 years. The second coming of Christ, which is where we are here now, actually, it started really in 2009. 2012 is sort of the date everyone had in their head, but it really started in 2009. The second coming is happening now. We are in it now, and what that is the internal involution of the awakening of the Christ within, the awakening of the God within, where we're no longer looking to external structures to inform us or tell us what to do, but we're being called to, what some might call like the inner guru. Right. And even in astrology, it's like the age of Aquarius is all about the inner teacher, letting go of the age of Pisces, which is the external, having external gurus, external teachers, and coming back into that center point where we access the God within, and the gnosis, which means knowledge, the knowledge that we have for direct revelation, direct knowing of the Godhead and the divine, uniquely as it moves through each of us as individuals. So that was a very long answer to your question, but again, you've like really got me super inspired on that topic.
I'm glad because I really like this subject, and I have my favorite authors who wrote about this, like Lars Muhl, Anaya, Sophia, Tom Kenny, and they all channel this their books, and they're quite interested and interesting, and I was fascinated by these stories. And to underline the fact that these energies are sacred, we have to explain that there is a preparation period and time between the two individuals hoping to get this type of sacred union. It's not like everything happens in a minute or a predetermined time frame. There is something that has to culminate with that particular encounter. You have to have a clean body, a clean mind. You have to vibrate at the same level in order for the miracle to happen.
I mean, I think that's a really, there's so much that's just like coming through as I'm hearing you say that. And yeah, I mean, in the feminine pathways, the initiation, the Magdalene path anyway, is, it's open to anybody. And it is in a self-initiation. So again, the feminine pathways typically don't require necessarily somebody external doing something to you to give you the knowledge, but it's actually an awakening that any of us can seek. We can ask to receive the initiation into the Magdalene path or into that particular order, so to speak, the order of Mary Magdalene. We can ask for that and receive it. It's about asking and receiving, and it's really a matter of opening ourselves to receiving however that initiation comes to us. So again, we all walk our own path. And I agree with you that yes, like having a certain vibration is an aspect of that. A clean mind, a clean body are all wonderful things to have. Though, I don't know if is that a prerequisite. I don't know. I absolutely think that it helps. But I don't know that I can speak to that. Like, is it a must? I don't have the answer to that. I think another piece of this too, to kind of tie this back, is the union, the sacred union that you're speaking to, is absolutely, we're all seeking that, and one of the ways we seek that is through intimate relationship, looking to sexual relationship to feel connected to another, to feel whole, to feel like we're part of something greater than ourselves. One of the ways that we seek that as humans is through the sexual relationship. One of the ways to turn the sexual relationship from something that's just sort of rote or just mundane or just kind of just not necessarily the sacred thing that it could be. One of the ways to do that is to understand how we can use sexual relationship to actually serve love, to be in service to that greater opening to love, that we can actually use relationship as a way to help open our partners to deeper expressions of who they are as love and as consciousness. The sexual relationship is a pathway to that. It's a pathway to direct revelation or direct gnosis of God, of knowing God. We can do that through sex and through sacred relationship.
Yes, and now that this is your specialty, I'd like to ask, Susan, how do you deal with a couple in which the partners are not on the same vibrational level, spiritually, physically? How do you bring them together?
Yeah, no, that's such a good question, and I will speak to that. And I mean, I love it because we've been very high level. But I love it. Oh, I just love talking high level stuff. And I would say that, in answer to that question, most of the people who come to me for help with their sexuality, at least initially, are not really coming from a place of like understanding energy or vibration. However, that it's a huge part of it. So one of the things that I do is I help them understand in a very embodied way what it feels like to embody what we would call feminine energy, what it feels like to embody masculine energy. And there's education on how these two polarities actually function in sexual relationship. A lot of times, there's a lot of reasons why couples struggle with sexual problems. One of my specialty areas is helping low desire women in relationship be able to increase desire and experience more pleasure in the sexual relationship. So one of the ways that I bring this energy conversation in without necessarily calling it energy, maybe I do, but it's a principle of this exact thing that I was speaking to, the practice of love. And the feminine pathway, it's a matter of learning how to actually feel our physical bodies more deeply and feel our emotions more deeply, feeling sensation. It's a focus of coming inward and downward into the body and completely meeting and greeting exactly what's there. And unfortunately, a lot of what we've been taught and what we see in media and on TV is sort of the opposite of that. It's the more externally focused sexuality, right? We have kind of the masculine polarity is pretty well accepted and pretty well understood. And so what I see is a lot of women often trying to produce the orgasm because the man can get there pretty fast. Why can't my body do it as quickly. Something must be wrong with me. I need to be fixed because I'm not reaching orgasm as quickly, or I'm not experiencing pleasure. What we don't understand is the feminine principle, the feminine energy, if you will. The feminine energy, if you will, is the equal and opposite of that. So to have more pleasure and more depth in the sexual union, one person needs to play the receptive polarity, needs to be in the feminine. If two people are in the masculine role of kind of giving and externally focused and trying to produce, we get focused on producing a result. Let's get to orgasm. When we turn the gaze inward and we slow down, we start to notice sensations in the body. We start to meet and greet what's there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not even looking for, it doesn't have to necessarily be pleasurable. It could be that I meet deep grief inside myself during a sexual encounter. I might feel deep inadequacy as I'm sexual with my partner. But the way that we open that and expand it into this union that we're longing for is by embracing exactly what's there. As we do that, we start the cycle, or we sort of initiate that cycle of yin and yang, masculine and feminine, alpha, omega, Shiva, Shakti, like what you've got there. It's literally how we start to generate that sexual fire and that sexual union. But to do that, we have to get conscious around what we're actually doing and then make a choice to cultivate that in sexual relationship.
So in other words, one of the partners should hold space for the other one until the other partner will look inside and investigate and try to gather the feelings and the emotions and see what's going on.
So one partner could hold space. Yeah, one partner could choose to be the one who is penetrating the moment. So it doesn't have to be the male partner. And I know some people in same-sex relationships who are listening to this. So it's not necessarily a gendered thing. I do primarily work with heterosexual couples in my practice, but I also work with some same-sex couples. It's not necessarily a gendered thing. This is an energy thing. So whatever gender you are, you can still embody either of these polarities. And this is just done by conscious choice. This isn't about like one is better than the other, one is right and one is wrong. This is just a conscious love play. So one partner could choose to be in that role of the space holder and the penetrative force. So I'm taking my presence outward and into my partner and feeling into my partner, penetrating with my consciousness into my partner. And the partner who is in the feminine or the more omega, the feeling capacity, would choose to allow and to open, to allow herself to receive the penetration or the presence into her body and to drop towards and outwards, like an expanding that happens in the feminine. Feminine orgasm is actually an expansion outward, not so much a direct linear up and out. It's an expanding outward. So that's a way to consciously play with that. So one person focuses on immersing into sensation, feeling and expressing that sensation through sound, through movement, through pleasure or pain, whatever, and animating it. It's the animation of the universe. That is life. That's Shakti. While the other one is holding the container for that to occur in. That is the Shiva. That's the space in which creation happens. And we have to have space in order for creation to happen. When there's no space and we're tight and we're closed off and I don't want to feel, or I'm scared to feel, and I don't want to, I don't want to receive my partner, or I'm afraid if I'm going to hurt her if I, whatever, all of that tightness, there's no space there. And as we know, when there's no space, there can be no creation. When there's no air, there can be no fire. So space opens up room so that there can actually be fire. There can be interplay of these two energies, which can lead to sexual bliss and transcendent states through sex.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing, because these fears can be any type of fear, not necessarily fear of not being able to give pleasure to your partner, but could be any fear of life, going outside, having losing your job. All these fears will inhibit your desire and your you be making yourself attractive to your partner.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think this is a really, really great thing to touch on, because fear itself is not necessarily the thing that, it's what I have found in my spiritual work and my sexual work, is that fear itself is not necessarily the thing that will keep us from the love. Fear actually is a gateway to love. It's actually it's a portal.
Interesting.
The thing that keeps us stuck and like generating more of the fear and what we don't want, it's our resistance to it. It's our unwillingness to embrace. Because the thing we all want the most is also usually the thing we fear the most. We want the divine union, but there's a deep terror that most of us have of actually surrendering through and into that because it feels like annihilation. Some part of us actually has to die in order to have that ecstasy and union that we all long for. So one of the ways to work with the fear is actually it's through our relationship to it. Again, this is about relationship, our relationship to fear. If we're constricting around it, saying, I don't want to feel this thing, and it might even be, I just don't want to feel the shame, or I don't want to feel the grief, or I'm afraid to even feel pleasure, right? It's the constriction that happens that is the problem. It's not the actual fear or emotion itself. Fear is just an energy. And it is absolutely tied in with our eros, with our life force erotic energy. The more that we allow our bodies to just metabolize the energy of that emotion, particularly fear or anger, because those tend to be the negative emotions, when we can just drop all the way into it and say yes to it without being afraid of the fear, fearing the fear, it can and will shift into erotic life force orgasmic energy, because that's what all of our emotional energy really is connected to.
Interesting.
And it's just our relationship to it that says, oh, that's bad, I don't want to feel that causes the problem. Which is a form of attachment. Resistance is a form of attachment.
Thank you. And talking about, we are talking about individual sexual energy and potency, and if I want to extrapolate to the world sexual energy, do we have, or did you perceive a dynamic of or changes of this sexual energy in the last 2-3 years, either up or down? And if yes, how does impact our spiritual path and overall vibration?
Oh gosh, that's a really big question. I can't say that I have paid attention on like a global level around that, other than what I will say. Here's what I'll say to that, Claudiu. A lot of the unrest that we have seen over the last few years and the polarization that everyone is, oh, we're polarized and this is so bad, and we need to all come together. And the polarity is actually not a bad thing, because what we just talked about a minute ago, we actually need intense polarity to create something new. And you've seen that. You've seen that with the events of the world, the really intense stuff that's happened has caused entirely new creations to form. We have things that exist now that did not exist 3 years ago because of that intensity. We have new communities, new technologies, new businesses that have sprouted up, all kinds of new creations that have come from that intense level of polarization. So if nothing else, that should be a really like obvious real world example of how polarity is not a bad thing, and that in fact we absolutely need it in order to have new information coming in and to create and generate the new earth, which we are literally creating. A really quick thing I'll say to that as well, during the time of Jesus, when Jesus walked the earth, if you believe that he lived, and I do, that was also the area of the world he lived in. It was a place of great unrest, political unrest, social unrest. It was not some peaceful mountaintop, in the middle of Tibet. Like, it was a lot of commotion, a lot of movement in the energy where Jesus was living and teaching at that time on the earth. And one of the things that they say, I think this is written about, Greg Braden I'm a big fan of Greg Braden's work. I want to say he talks about this in one of his many books, can't remember which one. But we actually need that kind of unrest because it breaks up the field around the earth, and it allows new light to come in, new information to percolate through the grid of the earth into humanity. So that's a way to look at all this unrest and intensity that we've had, is that it's not a bad thing. It's not something to be eradicated and to go back to neutrality, but rather something that I believe we can really use to launch us in to the new creation of the new earth.
Yes, and I love Greg Braden as well. I've been trying to get him on an interview, hopefully soon.
I hope you do.
But again, anything we do or anything we encounter, we should take it as a lesson. And I've learned this aspect of my life several years ago. So instead of label it positive or negative, it's a lesson. Let's see what I'm learning from it, and move on with that accumulated knowledge.
Yes, I mean, everything is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. If you really think about that, Claudia, like with what you're saying, if we're ready to become the student in any moment, sorry, loud up there, guys. Sorry about that. If we're ready and willing to humble ourselves and become the student in any moment, anything that's challenging to us at that time can become our teacher. Any person, any situation. And that's the profundity of that statement. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. It's not when the teacher is ready to teach. And if you think about that in terms of this whole polarity thing, the giving and receiving, right? Those are two sides of one coin. We have to have someone there to receive the wisdom of the teacher, because if no one's there, no one's there to receive the wisdom, then the gift can't be given. The giving is not complete, right? Somebody has to receive. And the act of receiving is the divine feminine principle. It's what we see in, the being or the energy that is Mary Magdalene, that we all have within us, by the way. It's not just something out there. And receiving is one of the most sacred and holy acts that any of us can do. We have to learn how to deeply, deeply receive, which is key also to sexual pleasure, by the way.
Yeah, and in my opinion, if the receiving is too easy, I think it won't be appreciated at its full value. So maybe that's why we have to have the friction and the struggles and in getting what we really want to, and even sometimes falling into our purpose is not that easy. Some of us will work on it our full lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and I love it because you've got this image here right behind you. In the Hindu tradition, or at least one of the paths of Hinduism, there's this idea of wanting to be, we're actually remaining, not unifying with God, not becoming one with God, because if you're one with God, you can't taste God. So there's kind of this idea of like that little bit of distance so that you can actually taste God. Right? So we all say this union that we want, but in some traditions of the Hindu path, they would say we don't want the union, because if you are the one, the all that is, how can the all that is experience itself? Which is one idea, is why God created creation, so that God could experience him or herself through its creation. It's deep. That's kind of a mind twister.
Yes, and in fact, I read about this aspect of different yoga paths the other day. Bhakti, Jnani, Royal. So all of them have something in common, but they are a little bit different, just because either you want to be in communion with God, or you want to detach yourself and taste and that feeling of seeing God a little bit from afar. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Like, how can God experience herself if not through the diversity of what we call creation? It's trippy. And yeah, in that light too, sure, many paths of knowing God. The yoga path of bhakti is all about devotion and knowing God through devotional love. But there's other paths that would be paths of service and knowing God through acts of service. And I think there's lots of pathways to that tasting of the divine.
Yeah, and we can experience every single path in multiple lives if we come back. So we have the eternity to do that.
Don't remind me.
Susan, you traveled to Nepal twice to study the ancient sacred art of Nepalese Vairacharya temple dance. What is so special about this dance?
Oh my gosh. Yes, the Vajracharya temple dance comes from the Newari tradition. The Newari people are sort of the original inhabitants of the Kathmandu Valley. What drew me to that form of dance? I mean, I'm a lover of dance my whole life. It's really a way that I connect with the divine and allow God to move through my body and be moved by that animating force. But what drew me to the Vajracharya path is that it's a tantric path, meaning that the purpose of the dance is actually to embody and become the deity. So there's different deities, different dances for different deities. You'll have the goddess Tara, for example, is one of them. That's one of the dances I studied. Vajra Yogini, and on, the whole pantheon. And part of the purpose of the dance, it was intended to actually help it was a meditation, and it was meant as a way to actually embody the energy of that particular consciousness through the body and bring it again, feminine, into form, bringing that consciousness into form through the human body. So that's what really drew me to that particular style of dance. And strangely enough, it was only taught to men inside of the temples. But in the last 50 years, it's come out. They brought it out as a way to really preserve that tradition. So they've turned it into a performance art now. So it's not just a temple art, but it's now done as performance, and women can also study and learn the dance.
And how the Western men reacted to the dance and to this approach?
How did Western men react to that dance?
Yes.
I mean, I didn't see Western men learn. When I was in Nepal studying, it was just myself and my teachers who were Nepalese. But I did see performances of it. And I think, typically the dances were sort of not looked upon highly by Western men. Traditionally, the Indian and Nepalese dances were kind of, seen as brothels, shamed. And really, they are these sacred arts. Very, very high arts, very refined arts that I believe hold a lot of power just within them. It can be very powerful, but unfortunately, the Western world kind of bastardized them and shamed them and turned them into something naughty when that's not really what they were meant to be.
Yes, unfortunately. And in fact, I interviewed a renowned dancer from Iran, living in the USA these days, and she told me that dancing is forbidden in Iran, especially women dancing. And she was expressing herself in a different country, different culture, trying to bring that spiritual nature of dancing to the world from the Middle East. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, Claudiu, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like anything having to do with the body being the feminine aspect, the body is, it's the physical aspect, it's the unconscious mind that manifests through the body, and we relate it with the feminine. And so again, suppressing dance is a way to, again, suppress that feminine expression and turn it into something shameful or dirty. I think you see that also in even a lot of the churches in America. Dance is allowed in some of them to some extent, but it's also very shamed and misunderstood, and it's not really seen as it's not really given its right place, in my opinion, like in our culture, for the power that it can be. It's okay to get up on TV and gyrate and make it all sexual, but when we turn it into something truly spiritual, people don't tend to make that translation because it involves the body. I think same is true with sex. Sex is sort of over there with dance, like it's something dirty, something shameful, not something that we should talk about in church, or consider it to be something spiritual.
Yes, and Susan, I know that our soul wants to manifest itself through love, through dance. The soul loves to dance. It has moves that are inhibited by our conscious mind as inappropriate, as you just said. How can we unlock these moves?
Yeah, how can we unlock the moves that our soul wants to dance? I think the first piece of that is just permission. There's this shame, veils of shame that everybody has sort of a certain degree or spectrum of shame over their body and their sexuality. Usually, I mean, I don't think any of us are born free, completely loving our bodies and accepting our sexuality. There's sort of an inherent thread of shame that's there. So I think the first piece is, and that's a tough one, that shame heals when it's seen through the eyes of love. So the first step to that would be to see your own body and your own desire, whether that's the desire to dance, the desire to paint, the desire to make love, to see that desire is holy. Desire it's truly the essence of creation. Desire is the energy of love in action. Without desire, there is nothing. We can't, if I want to make dinner tonight, I have to, have desire to eat, right? I have to have the desire to get up and go to the grocery store, or the urgent need to buy food, right? Everything begins with desire. So blessing that desire is holy and accepting it. And that's the first piece. The next piece is bringing it into expression and allowing yourself at least to have the full experience of that, even if it's not seen by another party, to allow yourself to have your experience in that, to allow yourself to be seen through your own eyes and the expression of that soul dance or the soul expression. So that would be kind of just the first place to start and embrace.
Thank you. And sometimes these blockages can be unlocked through breath work. Breath work will create that type of tension and pressure and release that our bodies need.
Absolutely. I think breath and movement go hand in hand. When we hold our breath, a lot of times what happens when we don't want to feel something, we'll hold our breath unconsciously. It's not even conscious. And over time, that breath holding will manifest as physical tension in the body. And then, like what you're speaking to, sort of that constriction around whatever the thing was, the tears, if it's not safe to cry, or the anger, oh, I'm not supposed to be angry here in this family. It's not okay to be angry. Or I don't want to show my joy. So I'm going to tighten and constrict around that, and we'll hold the breath. So absolutely, one of the ways to start to unlock that is to come into the breathing and to use the breath to actually open the body and expand the musculature in the body. The muscles hold energy and hold emotion as well. So starting to use the breath to actually open up those parts in the body where the musculature is tight, we absolutely will have emotional release from that. And the energy can start to move, and very tied in with the sexual energy as well. So if there's low desire happening, especially in a woman, we can look to the emotional energy and where is it constricted. And that's very much more of a psychological, psycho-spiritual thing than it is some physical problem that's wrong with her.
Yes, and recently I interviewed the renowned Cindy Dale, and she was giving us an example when a woman called her. She had cancer, and they had a long discussion. And Cindy said, I barely said anything. That woman talked for the entire session. I usually am the one who talks the most. And at the end, she said, thank you very much, hang up the phone, and that was it. And 2 years later, she called me back saying, you know what, I have to talk to you again because the cancer is back. After I talked to you 2 years ago, the cancer was gone. So Cindy said she needed a release. She needed someone to hold space for her, to listen to her. And by that simple interaction, all the pressure, the emotions, the energy, which had to be released, was released, and releasing the disease at the same time. So
totally. Do you know the work of Wilhelm Reich and the function of the orgasm? So, I mean, that his research is pretty phenomenal. He studied the orgasmic energy, which is orgone. It's here. It's all around us. Life force energy is everywhere, and he studied it, and that was his life's work. And one of his theories was that cancer is really just a restriction of the life force energy in the body. It's a death process happening in the body because of the constriction of that life force through the system. So he created contraptions and such that would sort of magnify that life force orgone energy into the body, and people were healed from their cancer through that. And I think what you're speaking to with that woman, it was exactly that. It was like whatever release she had just through that talking and having someone hold the space for her to express into and release, it got the energy flowing again. So the death process was actually reversed.
Yes.
And we can do the same thing, through cultivating our orgasmic energy and through keeping our channels open, through learning how to feel our bodies and emote and embrace all of the energy that's the life force that's flowing through us. And anyway,
yes, and we can talk for hours about methodologies and procedures to heal cancer. And even the gentleman who came to our house to replace the reverse osmosis water filters told us that he had to go to Mexico to treat his prostate cancer. He was healed in 4 months with various procedures. But the society only accepts, and the medical field only accepts 1 or 2 processes, which are very expensive, and they in the detriment of the body. So that shows how deficient our system is and how stuck in the past, and not by not accepting these new protocols.
Absolutely. And I mean, that whole conversation too, I think has to do with the whole, there's a whole industry that's built up around illness in the United States, especially, and pharmaceuticals. And yeah, you can't cure cancer here in America. You'll get the doctors that have discovered ways to do that have been like put in jail and had their licenses revoked. Because they make too much money on the chemotherapy and all the stuff that they sell that is toxic to the system. I mean, I think it probably does work for some people, but it kills probably just as many people as it helps. And I think that comes back to this idea of really, embracing a holistic understanding of our body, that we're not just one thing, that we're part of the whole, and that there's so many paths to the divine. There's so many paths to our own healing, not just one thing that we've been sort of spoon fed and told this is what you have to do. And that's the old paradigm, right?
Yes.
We're moving out of that now.
And talking about procedures, protocols, workshops, you have a lot of offerings on your website. Some of them are like 5 Pillars of Peace or Alchemy of Holy Flame. Can you give us more details, please?
Yeah, so those are some of my spiritual offerings on my SusanMorganTaylor.com is one of my websites, and I have more of my couples and sexuality work on pathwaytopleasure.com. So I do a lot of different things. The 5 Pillars of Peace is a very graceful and beautiful practice of prayer and presence that helps us learn how to shift our emotional vibration into what we would, if we're looking at creating the new earth, it's really a matter of vibratory frequencies that we embody through our body. So that pathway is a system of prayer. It's very simple, and it's really about direct revelation. And I just teach the 5 principles that help us to access those portals or gateways, if you will, that are actually often accessed through the shadow side, through fear, guilt, shame, denial. We actually access the light and the love by meeting those points of darkness within us. So not as limitations, but actually as entry points into the other side, which is the side of love and innocence and trust and surrender. And it's really a matter of actually just embodying that in the body in a very direct way. And so it's more of a structure that I teach that helps teach people kind of how to pray through the body and through direct connection with their own connection with God. That's what the 5 Pillars of Peace is.
And what about the Alchemy of Holy Flame?
Alchemy of the Holy Flame is not quite ready for launch to the world, but that's going to be a deep dive into the 5 pillars. I'm looking at putting that program together right now. It's been something on my heart to do. It will be a 5-month journey where we dive more deeply into each of the pillars in a very experiential way. It'll be very deep, and I'm super excited about bringing that one into the world. It's not quite birthed yet, but the page is on the website to kind of motivate me to get it out there.
Great, thank you. Let us know when it's done, and we'll promote that course.
Well, thank you.
And Susan, what do you think humanity needs the most these days?
Well, let me think about that for a minute. I think that humanity needs love, even in the face of adversity and even in the face of what appears to be the other, right? This whole thing that is polarity and polarizing us, of seeing there's them and there's us. Humanity needs just love for that, because that other lives in here, lives inside of us. That's the practice of alchemy and the practice of love. Can I take that opposite within myself and see it within myself and turn the contraction into expansion within my body? That is the practice of love. And I think that's what humanity really needs the most.
Yes, you are right, especially in these times. Yes, we need as much love as possible to send out in the world. And another question for you is, what is your definition of a fulfilled life?
My definition of a fulfilled life, I would say really feeling the desire and riding that like a wave, being able to say yes to that and manifest the joy, living in a state of joy. Like I feel like I'm just doing this so much in my own life right now in so many ways. I just made a huge life change and I like moved to a mountaintop in Western North Carolina from Austin, Texas just a few months ago. And it's literally like, this is like literally the manifestation of my dream. And I wake up every day and I'm just in a state of awe and bliss and just deep love and gratitude. And to me, that is a fulfilled life. It's being able to own our power as creators and lovers of life and vessels for the divine to move through. And then having like the enjoyment of experiencing that creation in the physical world.
Thank you very much for sharing. And we are approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
This is so. My only final thought, Claudiu, is you are a ton of fun. This is like
Thank you.
so many different things that I love to talk about, and that I don't even feel that I get enough of a platform to really bring in a lot of the spiritual side of my work. And I just want to thank you for just kind of opening up this opportunity and holding this space to allow me to kind of to share and have a nice little back and forth with you and to share with your listeners. I hope this has been of value to everybody.
For sure. Thank you very much once again for your time and for everything you shared with us today.
Oh, you're so very welcome, and thank you.
Thank you. And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Share it, like it. Visit spiritualinspired.ca. Now it's an independent standalone website. Check us out on Conscious Awareness Network. And until next time, love and gratitude.